Welcome to Second Take, the show that takes a look at the issues behind the news. Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana finally tabled his much-anticipated budget after the unprecedented postponement on 19 February. Terence Creamer joins me to discuss the highlights. Hi, Terence.
Hi, Chanel.
What was the overall framework of this budget and how did it differ from the one that was not tabled?
The overall fiscal framework almost remains intact. So we're wanting to have fiscal consolidation, so reduce the deficit from 5% currently to about 3.5% in 3 years' time. We want to peak in terms of our debt to GDP ratio at about 76.2%, which was sort of in line. I think it was 76.1% in the February one that wasn't tabled, and start bringing down that. You know, we spend 22 cents in every revenue rand on debt repayment at the moment. So we're starting to bring back that debt. So the overall framework in terms of the fiscal balances stayed the same. The big changes really came in how we were going to meet that framework. Now we know there was massive disappointment and unhappiness with the suggestion that we raise VAT to 17%, which would be a 2 percentage point increase. And that was rejected outright by the GNU cabinet. And that's why we didn't have the tabling back on the 19th of February. And what the minister has done is he's presented other taxes. So a VAT hike of 0.5%, another 0.5% in the subsequent year, so the next 2 years, 1% in total, getting to 16%. And then, also big ticket item was to not increase the brackets or not raise the brackets for personal income tax at the rate of inflation. And if you look at that in the first year, that's actually the bigger revenue item. So it's about, I think, 18 billion versus what you raised through VAT at about 13.5 billion on the revenue side. But of course, we needed to close a 60 billion rand gap, and that's before the PEPFAR. We haven't found yet the money to cover the PEPFAR withdrawal by the US, by the Donald Trump administration. So that's still to come. So we haven't fully closed the gap. And then they used other instruments around dipping into the contingency reserves, etc., to sort of find that balance and keep the fiscal framework intact. And I think the big difference this time was that it was actually tabled. But the same thing happened again where on the whole there's been a rejection by, specifically in the GNU, by this most significant coalition partner to the ANC, being the DA. So that's where we're at. We've tabled the budget, which is different, but we still have the disagreements, particularly around the sort of what the DA calls the tax and spend element and the lack of savings.
As you mentioned, the adjustments, including the lower proposed VAT hike, wasn't enough to secure the full support of the GNU cabinet.
Yes, so we're seeing pushback from civil society, from the unions. We're seeing specific pushback from political parties, both inside and outside of the GNU, some of which are planning protest action. So we're in this very difficult environment now. I mean, the fact that we tabled it, I think, is important. It's a milestone. But this disagreement is unprecedented and raises all sorts of issues about how we're going to solve this disagreement. You know, the budget now has to be voted on. The different bills were tabled in Parliament. These are money bills, so there are very specific rules and regulations that govern the way these can be amended. So I imagine that there's going to be a lot of attention to that. We're all going to learn a lot, I think, in the next few months about how we go about this. Whereas in the past, the budget was something sacrosanct almost, no one was ever really very happy. There were periods where I think there was generally happiness when things were going well economically in South Africa and we were experiencing high levels of growth. But since this last 10 years and a bit of really very paltry growth and seeing a lot of deterioration on the metrics, and we're seeing it also in the spending effectiveness. We can see it visibly in our cities, the deterioration, the decay. There's a lot of stresses all over the place in terms of this is where government plays a big role, specifically in hospitals and schools. So there's a lot of spending pressure, but we've got ourselves to a point now where if we keep raising debt to fund that, we're going to really crowd out eventually the next generation's ability to fund a lot of those activities. So there was a feeling that this should be about a growth budget. That was the message we got at the State of the Nation address by the President. But that's, again, because of the fiscal pressures, the difficult balancing act, it had to come down to how are we going to fund this budget. And growth really was overshadowed in this. So yes, there's a lot of unhappiness, and we are in uncharted territory.
What do these unprecedented budget developments mean for the budget process and its credibility?
Well, our budget process has always been held up as one of the best in the world, one of the most transparent. We get international awards. Yet people in South Africa are not going to hold on to that as, and champion that. They want to see effectiveness, I think, in the way money is raised so that people pay their fair share. And interestingly, in this budget, a lot more money has been given to SARS to help convert, some of the people that aren't paying their fair share or who are definitely owing but are outstanding to SARS. So there was 7 billion over the 3 years given to SARS to sort of enforce. So collect properly, pay your fair share, but then spend effectively. And I think, so even though we've had this pristine and internationally benchmarked process, it hasn't necessarily delivered for South Africans the way we should. So we're now in a new situation where we've never seen before of so much political horse trading around the budget. That's the nature now of the beast of having a coalition government, sort of GNU. And I suppose we're going to have to get used to it. So we've seen in other countries how this comes right to the very cliff edge. And unfortunately, we are going to now go to the cliff edge because April is the day that we are supposed to have the new budget in place. This still only has to get voted on in Parliament in April. As I said, there are quite firm guardrails around money bills. You can amend them, but it's quite tricky. You have to stay within the fiscal framework. And as I said, that fiscal framework doesn't give you much space now, currently, and it's tabled to, it doesn't give you headroom to say raise a lot more debt, which is the easy way out, the easy release valve. So we are in, as I said, uncharted territory. We're going to have to see how the negotiations are going to take place. The key protagonists here are definitely the Democratic Alliance and their leader, John Steenhuisen, and probably the President, but the Finance Minister. The Finance Minister is under huge pressure, I think. I think his job is going to become under scrutiny. And we're going to have to see how that horse trading, which we're not used to, evolves. Will it take all the way to the brink, to the voting against these bills that have been tabled in Parliament in April, or will there be some sort of negotiated settlement? Both sides have indicated that their door is open. So John Steenhuisen made it clear that while they reject this budget in its current form, they're open to negotiations. I think that's an important signal. And obviously the counter side will be open to some sort of settlement so that after tabling, we can sort of implement something. So what was also interesting, though, the frustrations did bubble over in some of the press conferences during the budget lockup yesterday, and that the Finance Minister dropped that the DA wasn't interested only in solutions related to the budget process. And he dropped things like the Bailer Bill and the Expropriation Act and the NHR, which really does take us into real political horse trading territory, which is unfortunate, but it's not unprecedented as we've seen in the rest of the world. And maybe it's something we're going to have to get used to.
Thank you. That's the Second Take show for this week. Thank you for watching, and join us again next time for more news analysis. Also, don't forget to listen to the audio version of our Engineering News daily email newsletter.